Welcome back. In the previous section, Integration of Selenium with JMeter, we learned to configure JUnit test with JMeter, and then we learned to execute the script using JMeter sampler and its integration with Selenium WebDriver. Now in this section, Designing Test Plan, we will deep dive into learning about the test designing, organization, baseline test, and distributing the load across different machines. So let's start. Let's see what we are going to cover in this section. We will first start with learning about workload designing, which will help us understand the different components and its organization in our test. Then we will talk about script validation and then creating a baseline test and using it to measure the performance of other tests against the baseline. After that, we will learn about distributing the load across different machines, such as using the master and slave configuration, its architecture, and then setting up the environment, test, and adding the properties so that we can execute our test on different client machines. And we will also see an example of it. So let's begin with very first video of this section, workload designing. The very first step in workload designing is the identifying all the test scenarios that are in scope for our test. Once we have identified them and created a sample test, then we need to make sure that we have made all the configuration settings as per our needs, such as we might want to use CSV file in order to pass the test data for our test to run, or we need to add validations or condition based on which we can decide whether we want to execute the sampler request or not. In such cases, preprocessors can be created for our test, and then we can decide whether we want to execute the following sampler request or not. Also, if you want to delay the subsequent sampler request to mimic the user's action, in that case, we can make use of timers and delay the execution by few seconds. Then, we also need to set up our test to capture the test execution results such as error or log details in the file format or test execution data. For example, we can provide the path of a file where we can capture the test execution details, and then later on we can share these details with the team to help them debug the issue further. Also, script validation such as response code as well as response data or any other details can be validated with the help of assertions, and we can also use post-processors. Once you have set up all these components in your test plan, then you can treat this test as a baseline, and we will talk about it more in the following video. As of now, just know that these are the main components of your test which can be added to insert the input data and validate the outcome of the test as per the specified requirements. Also, we can simulate users' behavior by putting load on a particular action or a sampler. For example, in case of a flight reservation scenario, if you remember, when user logs in, we can either add a load to perform the entire test where user logs in, purchase the flight tickets and then logs off, or we can put a load on a particular request where user logs in, purchase the ticket, and that purchasing request will get executed multiple times for a specified amount of time. Or we can just put a load on a purchase sampler where user will log in and purchase request will run for a specified number of times and then it will log off. All these conditions can be added at the test plan level, which gets applied to all the samplers, or at the element or individual sampler level. Again, this customization depends on your test requirements. So this was just an introduction for the workload designing.